So today, we're diving into a case that really tested the very limits of justice in Sri Lanka. It's a story about one family's incredible fight against the state, a fight that ended up with a ruling that changed everything. It all kicked off with a death in police custody and finished with a question that totally redefined the law.
I mean, just think about that for a second. This is the central question the Supreme Court had to grapple with. It feels almost impossible, right? If the state violates the most fundamental right of all, the right to life, who is actually left to stand up and demand justice?
Okay, so our story begins with this man, Lasantha Jagath Kumara. Now, he was an army deserter, and he also had a warrant out for his arrest linked to illicit liquor. But in June of 2000, his life took a turn that was both tragic and ultimately fatal.
What his family went through was just a nightmare. According to their account, he was arrested on June 12th and then held for 5 days without ever being brought before a judge. Day after day, they showed up, and they had to watch his condition get worse and worse. He told them he was in pain, they saw his arms swell up and turn black, he was even vomiting blood. But their pleas just fell on deaf ears. It took until the 17th, a full 5 days after the arrest, for him to finally see a magistrate. Just 3 days after that, he was gone.
You know, out of everything in the case file, this one little detail is just absolutely gut-wrenching. His fingers were so swollen, his body so beaten, that he couldn't even hold a simple drink that was given to him. This tells you right away, this wasn't some minor scuffle. This was a man whose body was literally shutting down.
So you can probably guess what happened next. When this all came out, you had two completely different stories about what went down inside that police station. So let's put them side by side.
On one side, you have the family's version, a story of prolonged torture that started on June 12th. But on the other side, the police, well, they claim they didn't even arrest him until 4 days later on the 16th. Their story was that he resisted arrest with a knife, so they had to use minimum force, which only resulted in a few blows to his arm. So you see the huge gap here, a 5-day brutal ordeal versus a 1-day arrest using reasonable force. The stories couldn't be more different.
With two wildly different narratives on the table, the court basically had to put on its detective hat. Its job was to piece together all the evidence to figure out what was real and what was fiction. And well, once they started digging, the police's version really started to unravel.
And this is where the police story just didn't hold up. First off, how could the family complain to a senior officer about the arrest on the 15th if the police were claiming he wasn't even arrested until the 16th? It makes no sense. Then, get this, a police report written on the 17th accidentally referenced the date as today, June 16th, which strongly suggests it was actually written a day earlier. Add in the fact that different officers gave conflicting stories about his injuries and a super sketchy log entry for the arrest vehicle, and the whole official story started to look like Swiss cheese. And then there was this. The postmortem report found 20 separate injuries. We're talking bruises and scrapes all over his body, his head, his chest, his abdomen, every single one of his limbs. This was a far cry from the few blows to his right arm that the police were trying to sell.
And the official cause of death just sealed the deal. So, what does this medical term actually mean in plain English? It means he was beaten so badly that his muscles began to break down, flooding his body with toxins that his kidneys just couldn't handle. They failed. Those 20 injuries, they weren't just incidental, they were the direct cause of his death.
So, the facts of the case were crystal clear. Lasantha Jagath Kumara was tortured to death while in police custody. But, and this is a huge but, proving what happened was only half the struggle. Now they faced a legal problem that threatened to shut the whole case down. The roadblock was this one little line in the Constitution, Article 126(2). It says that a person whose rights have been violated can apply to the court. Now pay attention to that word, person. The law was written with a living victim in mind. And this brings us right back to that insane paradox. The police had committed the most extreme violation imaginable, so extreme that the victim himself could no longer seek justice. It's like, by killing him, had they actually managed to erase their own crime from the law's reach? So, faced with this legal dead end, this impossible situation, the Supreme Court of Sri Lanka did something truly remarkable. Instead of just throwing the case out, they decided to reinterpret the law itself to create a brand new path for justice. Okay, let's walk through how they pulled this off. Step 1. They said that even though it's not written down explicitly, the Constitution implies that there is a fundamental right to life. Step 2, and this is the big one, they argued that a right is totally meaningless. It's an illusion.
if there's no way to actually get a remedy when it's violated. Step 3, because of that, they decided to interpret the Constitution in a broad, expansive way, in a way that advances rights, not limits them. And all of that led to the final game-changing move. They ruled that when a victim is killed, the right to seek justice doesn't just vanish. It passes on. It devolves to their family.
This one line from the ruling really captures the entire spirit of the decision. The court flat out refused to let a legal technicality create a loophole that lets people get away with murder. They were basically saying that for justice to be real, it has to be reachable, especially in the most extreme cases.
So you see, this was so much more than just a victory for one family. The case brought by Sriyani Silva, Lasantha's widow, created powerful new legal standards, precedents, that are still incredibly important today. So what did this case really change? Well, for starters, the court officially recognized the right to life as a fundamental right. It confirmed that families have the right to sue on behalf of a loved one who's been killed by the state. It also put senior officers on notice that they are responsible for what their subordinates do. And maybe most importantly, it made a powerful statement that a person's background, remember, Lasantha was an army deserter, has absolutely no bearing on their fundamental rights or their family's right to compensation.
And in the end, the court awarded compensation to Sriyani Silva and her child. And notice this, they held both the state responsible and the individual officers personally responsible. It was a very clear signal that accountability goes all the way from the top of the institution right down to the individuals in uniform.
And that brings us right back to where we started, with that powerful question. The case of Sriyani Silva gives us one incredible answer. It's a reminder that for our rights to mean anything at all, the doors to justice have to stay open, especially for those who can no longer speak for themselves.